The moon hung low, casting a sickly pale light over the narrow country road. The thick trees lining either side stood like sentinels, their branches clawing at the sky. The air was heavy, suffocatingly still, with not even the chirp of a cricket to break the silence. It was a road that seemed to stretch into nowhere, isolated from the world, forgotten. A single pair of headlights cut through the darkness. Inside the car, Emma gripped the wheel tightly, her knuckles white. She hadn't planned on taking this road, but a wrong turn had brought her here. Now, all she wanted was to get back to the main highway, to civilization, to safety. But the GPS kept spinning her in circles, and the longer she drove, the more oppressive the road became. Ahead, something caught her eye. At first, she thought it was just a trick of the light, the moon casting strange shadows. But as she drew closer, her heart began to pound. There, hovering just above the ground in the middle of the road, were shapes. Bodies. They were eerily still, floating in a slow, unnatural sway, as if caught in a breeze she couldn't feel. Emma slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt. Her breath caught in her throat as she stared at them. 5 bodies, draped in what looked like thin nightgowns, hung suspended in midair. Their arms dangled limply at their sides, heads tilted at odd angles, faces turned toward the ground. The way they swayed was almost hypnotic, an unsettling rhythm that made her stomach churn. She sat frozen, gripping the wheel as her mind raced. What was she seeing? Was it real? She blinked hard, expecting the figures to disappear when she opened her eyes. But they remained, floating like grotesque marionettes. There was no sound, no sign of life, just the chilling presence of the bodies. Panic surged through her. She threw the car into reverse, but as the tires screeched and the vehicle began to move backward, the bodies twitched. One of them lifted its head, its face pale and hollow, eyes black pits that seemed to bore into her. Then another twitched, followed by a third. One by one, they slowly turned their heads, their lifeless eyes locking onto her. A scream bubbled in Emma's throat, but it refused to escape. She slammed the car into drive, determined to swerve around them. Her foot pressed hard on the gas, but as she approached the bodies, the air grew thicker, heavier, like she was driving into a wall of fog. The car slowed, as though an invisible force was pushing back against her, refusing to let her pass. Desperate, Emma glanced at the rearview mirror. More shapes had appeared behind her, floating bodies that were slowly closing in. She was trapped. The road, once silent and desolate, now seemed alive with them. They hovered closer, their slow, deliberate movements filled with a strange, terrible purpose. Tears blurred her vision as she pounded the steering wheel in frustration. She was suffocating in the thick air, her lungs struggling to breathe. The bodies, now just feet away from her car, seemed to radiate cold, seeping through the windows and chilling her to the bone. Then, in a moment of pure terror, the figure closest to her car lifted its hand. The fingers curled, reaching out, as if beckoning her forward. Emma's heart slammed against her ribs, her mind screaming at her to flee, but there was nowhere to go. The floating bodies surrounded her, their lifeless eyes unblinking, their hands outstretched in a silent, ghostly command. The last thing Emma saw before the darkness consumed her was the face of the nearest figure, its lips curling into a grotesque smile. And then, there was only the road. Silent. Empty. Forgotten.